When you look at all the RTX 3080 reviews so far, you will usually see it tested with a really high-end CPU and other really high-end components, and that totally makes sense for testing purposes, but it might not be what you would actually buy or what you would spend your hard-earned money on. So today I wanted to make a gaming build where I focus on saving some money on things that just don't benefit your gaming performance as much and focus on the ones that actually do. Now, I wouldn't really call it a budget build, but a very value-focused €1,400 build that will get the most out of this RTX 3080 graphics card and allow you to game smoothly on a 4K resolution, which is pretty much what these new GPUs were made to do. So today I'll go over all the components in this little system right here and talk about why I chose them, how it performs in general, and last but not the least, how it compares to my high-end test benches here that will cost you way more. So let's begin. I'll just start by saying that right now isn't exactly the best time to build a completely new system. There are a lot of new graphics cards coming from both AMD and Nvidia, and AMD will be launching their new CPUs only a couple of weeks from now. So this complete build guide is really for anyone that needs a new PC right now and cannot really wait, but it's also a great base for anyone that can wait a bit and wants to build something in a few months from now, because you can just replace the processor with a newer version and you should be good to go. Now, speaking of processors here, if you're putting together a nice value-focused rig, you basically have to go for an AMD system. Intel does have a slight lead in that high-end gaming, but AMD's value game is just simply so much stronger. I went here with a Ryzen 5 3600X processor that has 6 cores, 12 threads, and pretty good clock speeds that offer enough performance for almost everything you want to do with your PC now, plus a bit more for future games. Now, the 3600 without the X is usually considered a better value option than the one with the X, but when I was putting the system together, they actually had the exact same price. If the 3600 is much cheaper in your region, you can just get that instead. And if you're holding out a bit, get the Ryzen 5 5600 or whatever the best value mid-range CPU will be a few months from now. If you need more CPU power for video editing, for example, it will be worth looking at the 8-core Ryzen 7, but what I wouldn't do is buy the cheaper 4-core Ryzen 3 model, if you can even find one right now, because they're mostly sold out. Now, they have really positive reviews because of their very good value if you just look at the CPU price. But the overall saving on a complete gaming system is quite small, and 4-core CPU is just starting to fall behind on some games already. So if you're building a system for the next couple of years, I wouldn't really save more on your CPU choice. And that's also why I went with a B550 motherboard as well, which offers some of the newer features the cheaper B450 motherboards don't have, and that gives you a bit more certainty in the long run, especially when it comes to future processor support. I went with the ASUS TUF Gaming B550M Plus Wi-Fi motherboard, which is on the affordable side, but still has a very solid power delivery setup with 10 power stages and some really nice heat sinks. It can easily handle a high-end Ryzen 9 3900X, so if you want to upgrade to a new high-end Ryzen later, you won't have to replace this motherboard. It has PCIe Gen 4 support, 2.5 gigabit LAN, and Wi-Fi 6, and it also comes with that ASUS noise cancelling microphone feature that can actually remove your background noise even when you're using a USB or a Bluetooth microphone. Now, if you don't need Wi-Fi, by the way, there is a non-Wi-Fi version as well, which will save you around $20. And there's no point paying for Wi-Fi if you're not going to use it. And I would say, unless you want some specific feature that this board doesn't have, there is actually no good reason to spend more on your motherboard either. I wanted to keep the whole build pretty compact because after this video, I'll be taking this PC to my living room to hook it up to my new 4K 120Hz OLED TV. So ideally, I wanted an affordable micro ATX case that still offers a lot of airflow to keep the system nice and cool. And this Cooler Master NR400 is perfect for that. It's a well-built 60 euro case that comes with 2 fans and a full mesh front. I got the optical dry bay version here, if you still want to add a DVD or a Blu-ray drive, but there is a non-ODD version that has a completely clean front, and I think it looks a bit cleaner, and it will cost you around 5 euros more if you want that one. Now when it comes to memory, Corsair LPX modules have been my go-to choice for basically all non-RGB builds. They are cheap, they look clean, and I don't know a single motherboard that they don't work on. Now 32 gigabytes would be great if you can afford it, but 16 gigabytes will be enough for most games still, so that's what I went with today. Now keep in mind, this is also something you can always upgrade in the future and just, add 2 more modules if you want to. I have a 3200 MHz kit here, but do look out for the 3600 MHz kit if you can, and if they're similarly priced, because you will get about 1 to 2% extra performance out of it alone. If you're really looking to save as much money as possible, you technically don't need to buy an extra CPU cooler, as the Ryzen 5 comes with a very simple cooler that looks good and works perfectly fine. But a good tower cooler does help to reduce noise, especially when you have an airflow focus case like this one. And it might also help you get a bit more out of your CPU. And I would say it just turns a basic looking system into something that actually looks really nice. I have a Cooler Master Hyper 212 Black Edition here, which is one of the cheaper coolers that, just works really well and also looks really great. So I think it's definitely worth the $30 it costs. For storage, I went with a 1TB Kingston A2000 NVMe SSD. I think avoiding traditional hard drives should be a goal for any modern system. SSDs are much faster, they don't make noise, and are more reliable in general. Now, they've also gotten a lot cheaper, with 1TB drives now dropping under $100. So unless you really need a lot of space and you're on a tighter budget, try to stick to SSDs as much as possible. That being said, games really don't benefit from getting a super fast SSD though, but this A2000 is actually cheaper than most budget SATA drives, while being nearly as fast as most high-end NVMe drives. So there is no good reason not to go for it, and no good reason to spend more on it either. I wish it didn't have a blue PCB, but CPU cooler hides it nicely anyways. 1TB should also be enough to have a couple of games installed at least, but you can just adjust the size to your own needs and go with that. One area where you should never ever cheap out on is the power supply, especially with a high-end GPU like in this system. A good power supply will keep your system running stable for years, while a bad power supply can actually damage all your other components. So, please avoid those unknown brand PSUs that offer really high wattage for little money, because they're an actual safety risk in my opinion, and just stick to reputable brands like Seasonic, like Corsair, Cooler Master, Be Quiet, and so on. Now for this build, I went with a 650 watt Seasonic Core Gold power supply, which is a bit cheaper than their Focus and Prime series that I usually use here, but they still have the same high quality standard without some extra features that you really don't need. It is only a semi-modular model instead of a fully modular one, which doesn't really matter much. And it still comes with a hybrid fan mode, so it stays really quiet and idle and only spins up once you start really gaming. You just don't get that button to turn the fan on all the time like you would get on more expensive models. So it is still cutting the cost of the PSU, but without actually sacrificing reliability, which is what we're trying to do today, right? Now, that brings me to the final centerpiece of this build, which would be the GPU. I went with the ASUS TUF Gaming RTX 3080, which I already reviewed separately, so if you want to know more about this card, you can just check that video out. I'll leave a link up here. But basically, this 3080 can handle any game at 4K while staying very cool and very quiet. I would say all of the previous parts I mentioned cost around 670 euros altogether, so putting in an RTX 3080, which costs more than everything else combined, does kind of feel a bit unbalanced, but that's kind of the whole point of this video today, right? Let's see what you actually lose with this affordable-ish rig versus a fancy test bench. If you're just playing some games on a 4K monitor, not just testing them, it's basically impossible to tell the difference between the two. The Intel test rig has a slight lead, but it's not something that you will actually notice much, and definitely not something that you need to pay so much extra for, in my opinion. If all you want to do is game on a 4K resolution, this little system here will work really well, and there is no need for a lot of crazy expensive components to get the same 4K experience. But when we look at the 1440p resolution, the gap is actually bigger, with this Ryzen 5 CPU being more of a limiting factor than the GPU is. It's still doing really well, and in terms of value, you still get more frames per dollar, but there's definitely a noticeable difference between the two systems here. So if you're going for that high refresh rate 1440p experience, it's worth spending more on the CPU, in my opinion. I also think that none of the other components right here are really doing much to hold this system back, which was kind of the point that I wanted to make today. So having a more affordable case or a more affordable cooler, having a bit less or slightly slower memory, or getting a slightly cheaper SSD really doesn't hurt your games in a huge way. Now, having said that, it might be still worth spending a bit more for other reasons, like noise, for example. Looking at the thermal results of this system, a simple case like this shows that you don't really need an expensive metal box for a high-end system, as all the thermal results are really good. But these two simple fans are just working too hard to make all this happen. So I would consider spending a bit more for a couple of fans that will keep it quiet as well as nice and cool. For anyone that is actually considering to get a system for gaming on a 4K monitor or a 4K TV, it should be quite comforting to hear that you don't need to invest thousands of dollars or euros to have a great 4K experience. Now, I think that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know in the comments down below if there's maybe anything that you would have done differently, and tell me why. And while you're there, please give me a like and click that subscribe button to never miss an upload. Bye guys, see you in the next one.